So we have completed for our assessment a hazards scoring form, an inspection report for falls on the level. This is just one example of an inspection report format. These forms take a lot of different shapes and descriptions, but they all generally tend to record the same sorts of information. So we've got the property identification here, its address, the age, unless it's a house, the surveyor's name and the date of inspection. Because this falls on the level, the vulnerable group is the over 60s. That's people over 60 years old. And so we've got to assume that the property is occupied by those over 60. So the deficiencies, so I've noted here the two small steps at the front entrance to the property, which is poorly illuminated. Disrepair to the block paving in the rear yard of the property. The very slippery surface due to the algal growth on the decking at the rear of the property. Poor lighting to the rear yard of the property, and the property has poor heating and insulation, making a fall more likely. So the national average is 1 in 124, and I think that our property is worse than that. So that gives us a starting point. So moving to those worked examples, we found that we had a worked example with a likelihood of 1 in 18, which was our one with these kind of church-like windows. And so we thought our property, the chances of a fall in our property were possibly a little more likely because of that slippery decking, particularly, and so we gave ours a 1 in 10. So we've got to justify that. So we're not justifying it based on that worked example. They're just helpful trying to give you a steer on the scores. We have to justify it based on what we found in the deficiencies. So the deficiency set, based on those deficiencies, the small steps at the front or entrance to the property are poorly illuminated and unlikely to be seen, increasing the likelihood of someone tripping as they enter the property. To the rear of the property, the block paving is in poor repair and is likely to cause a fall by someone moving through the rear yard. The raised decking is exceptionally slippery, and a fall in this area is extremely likely. But there is no door in the area covered by the decking, so as there is no door in the area covered by the decking, it will reduce the frequency of use of the slippery decking. So we're saying there is bad, but it's not quite as bad as it could be if it was on a regular thoroughfare. The property suffers from cold living conditions. These will increase the likelihood of a fall. So we're then looking now at the outcomes. So the national averages are given there, and I've put these little lines just to indicate where they are on the spread of harm outcomes. So if we were to leave the example at the national averages, we'd use the representative scale points 0.2, 10 and 31.6. However, in this case, there are relatively sharp and hard, unyielding projections and surfaces for people to hit if they were to fall in the rear yard of the property. Not only that, but because the rear yard of the property is surrounded by those high walls, it's quite poorly overlooked. As a result of that, that means that someone could remain out there, possibly in cold weather, for a significant period of time before they were discovered following a fall. So I've decided to increase the severity of the harm outcomes. Now, if you want to do this, you can do it for all three, class 1, 2 and 3, or if you want, you can just do it for 1 or 2 of them. In this case, I've done it for all 3 because of that chance of being left outside and suffering for leaving yourself undiscovered for a period of time. And remember, we're talking about the over 60s here, rather than say, for instance, a young child who is likely to get back up again very quickly after they've fallen down, because they haven't got as far to fall and they're not as fragile when they do fall. So I've increased it by 1 representative scale point. Now, if you are increasing the severity of your spread of harm outcomes, then you should do so very cautiously. It's very rare that you will move it more than 1 representative scale point more severe. So we're saying that 0.5% of the time the outcomes will be death or permanent paralysis instead of 0.2% of the time. Then we're saying for class 2 outcomes, which are really pretty serious but not as serious, then we're saying that 21.5% of the time there will be class 2 outcomes as opposed to 10%. And finally, we're saying that it's 46.4% chance of class 3 outcomes as opposed to 31.6%. So in just the same way as we described before, we've got to add up 0.5, 21.5, and 46.4 and subtract it from 100 to give us the percentage of class 4 outcomes, which in this case is 31.6%. So the justification for this is that the rear yard has hard and relatively sharp edge surfaces which could be struck by a person falling. In addition, the high wall would mean that a person may remain undiscovered for a significant period of time before being discovered and given assistance in this case, increasing the severity of harm outcomes from this hazard. The rating score for this hazard, therefore, is, after we've done the calculation, 4,074, which means it's a hazard band B, and it is what we term as a category 1 hazard. In other words, the local authority discovering this hazard would have a duty to take some kind